definitely was not the headline that we were expecting to get late on a Tuesday night, but the two New York teams in the Knicks and the Nets making this type of a deal, and both teams sort of flying in different directions. So just for the trade details, the Knicks traded 4 unprotected first-round picks of their own, a 2025 first-round pick from the Milwaukee Bucks, a first-round pick swap in 2028, a 2025 second-round pick, and forward Bojan Bogdanovic, who the Knicks traded for at the deadline, and he ended up missing the playoffs. So Bogdanovic, actually going back to Brooklyn, spent some time there a couple years ago, and exchange the Nets give up Mikal Bridges and 2026 second round pick, I believe it is. So the Nets go on to sort of finally press that rebuild button. There were a lot of rumors surrounding whether or not they were going to move around Mikal Bridges. They put out, maybe it was a little bit of a front to drive up the price on him, that they were fully comfortable in rebuilding around him. Now, Bridges is an excellent player, but at 27 years old, that never really made sense to me. But ultimately, look where it got them, where they get this haul of assets, including some picks along the way that belong to themselves, because they ended up making a second deal as well with the Houston Rockets, where they exchanged some picks there. Rights to pretty much first round picks in 2025 and 29, and the Phoenix pick, and the Nets were able to get their own pick back. So obviously a lot of draft capital flying back and forth there. I know it can be a lot to keep up with, but essentially this sets the Nets up in this area where they can rebuild heading into next season. They're supposedly not done moving assets. They do have that big Ben Simmons contract. Not sure if they were maybe going to try to go after a young star. They could potentially try and use that along with these draft picks. But I think that they are just fully hitting the reset button and seeing where it takes them. But for the Knicks, this is a situation where they had a very successful season this past year, and if it weren't for injuries, they could have potentially had a chance to take down the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, I never thought that the Knicks were going to be able to knock out the Celtics as they were currently constructed, and this is definitely a step in the right direction in terms of their immediate level of competitiveness. But there is something to be said for the fact that this was a massive haul of draft picks that they gave up, and it does sort of go from being this fun, feisty Knicks team that has been in the playoffs the past few years to, well, they are committed to winning a championship right now, and expectations are coming. And the Knicks understand that as well. That's why they make this kind of a deal. But it is interesting that they have sort of, out of nowhere almost, it seemed like when they signed Jalen Brunson just a few off seasons ago, they were this team struggling to find their identity, and now just like that, they find themselves in the heart of the NBA Finals contention. So you have to give the front office a ton of credit for where they have gotten up to this point. But things become a lot trickier for the Knicks this offseason, considering the fact that they still have a lot of unknowns with some key players that they need to bring back. OG Anunoby and Isaiah Hartenstein are the two guys that it feels like are massively impactful to the identity that the Knicks have of being this hard-nosed team, getting it done on the defensive side of the ball, and being smart offensively, having passing ability 1 through 5, and can provide ball movement. I know that it was a lot of Jalen Brunson in the postseason this past year, but that's also because of the fact that there were so many injuries for the Knicks coming into this whole thing. So I think that things currently stand today, I would not pick them to be better than the Celtics next year. They have to figure out what they are going to do. Now, it sounds like they are still fully committed to trying to get OG Anunoby under contract. And with all of these contracts, it's important to consider that under this new CBA, they do have the possibility of bringing everybody back. They are going to fall deeper into the luxury tax, but they can still do so. It just restricts everything else outside of that. So the question is a little bit, are the Knicks a completed process here when if they bring back OG Anunoby and Isaiah Hartenstein? I think they have the majority of what they are going to need. I still feel like spacing is probably one of the bigger things for them. And later in the show, we're going to be diving into prospects that can play potentially impactful basketball for contending teams immediately. The Knicks have a couple late first round picks, I believe. Specifically, it is 24 and 25, something along those lines, and that's maybe an area where they can look to go after a couple different guys. I guess maybe a little sneak peek into that. There are some three-point shooters. I think that if the Knicks were to go out and make a move for a Tristan Da Silva, maybe a Baylor Shireman, these are a couple guys that, again, we're going to dive into a little bit deeper in the show later, but I think just a little bit of spacing with size as well. Now, obviously, we know Tom Thibodeau. He's all about his defense as well. So I don't know if necessarily Tristan Da Silva has showed the overall background in terms of defense that he might not be the number one option there. But, regardless with this Knicks situation, I do think that they have checked a number of boxes in terms of being a legitimate contender. And it is interesting sort of having this conversation in relation to everything that was just sort of brought up about the Boston Celtics for a number of these years, where the Celtics, from the perspective of most people, don't have a top 5 player in the NBA. And typically in this league, we see that as something that is necessary to win a championship. But the fact that the Celtics were able to get it done this year without maybe having that traditional superstar performance dragging their team through the playoffs, the Knicks can look around at the roster that they assembled, and there is a ton of well-rounded talent there. Again, especially if they bring back OG Anunoby, there is so much switchability on defense. That was another massive part of the Celtics' makeup this past season. Spacing is going to be a thing for them, and that would be my number one concern. And sort of very briefly on that note as well, when you talk about the pursuit of Anunoby and Hartenstein and the fact that you're lining it up with this massive contract coming in from Mikal Bridges, you already paid Jalen Brunson, of course, and all of these different factors, it does make me question what the future of Julius Randle in New York is going to be. Randle is an interesting player. I think that the majority of NBA fans, I don't know how many you are going to find that Julius Randle is their favorite player, but at the same time, I do think that he provides something. The Knicks, unquestionably, in my eyes, were worse off not having him this year during the playoffs because he was injured. Now, if they can turn that into another asset that's possibly more malleable with what the Knicks are currently trying to run with, because I do have questions with Randle, the fact that in my eyes, he plays a lot of isolation basketball. He's shown flashes of development over the past couple of years in terms of passing, and I think coming off of this year as well, maybe there is something within him that understands that this is very clearly Jalen Brunson's team now, and if he's more receptive to playing a little bit more of a number 2 role, that could be massively impactful for them, because he plays defense when he wants to, is a little bit of the issue for me with him. But he can play defense and he can rebound, both of which are, again, when you talk about the Knicks being this hustle team, I feel like that's a very big part of their identity, and I'm just curious how they're going to go about this in terms of Julius Randle and what his future looks like. Now, I'm not sure necessarily what the options are out there in terms of, are you going to be able to get a lot of value out of Julius Randle, who it's not like his stock is exactly sky high right now. But I don't know that the Knicks are going to need to either. Again, my one glaring thing for them would be three-point shooting. I don't know necessarily how great you can feel about that. Now, Dante DiVincenzo had an incredible second half of the season. We saw Josh Hart knock down some big threes in the postseason, so who knows, maybe if that can come into a regularity for him, that would be, I mean, I think that this Knicks organization, especially now that you talk about, I can't believe I've gone 10 minutes here without mentioning the Villanova Knicks here. You have 5 Wildcats from that championship team in the late 2010s, and I think that all of these guys are going to have a chemistry that is unlike any sort of dynamic we have seen in recent NBA history, considering you have 5 players from college together who are all very publicly still close and are all winning basketball players. So I'm super intrigued by that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, but definitely for the Knicks, this comes into a perspective where, yes, it's absolutely fun, and I think no matter what, you're probably looking at the fact, Knicks fans are just going to be so grateful for what they have right now. I really, at least the Knicks fans in my life, I think are just, smiling through this whole process after a number of years of stagnancy from the franchise, that at least it seems like they are making moves in the right direction. Now, this Mikal Bridges deal does come with risk, undoubtedly, and as fun as everything is right now, there's going to be a buildup of pressure over the next couple years. But at the same time, I think that we have seen in the NBA year in, year out, especially as of late, that if you want to contend, you kind of just have to hang in the conversation long enough until your window opens. To some degree, that's what happened with the Boston Celtics this past year. You go back in every year in the playoffs lately, there is some sort of injury that does seem to sway the results of the playoffs. So for the Knicks, I think that they are in a great spot right now. Again, maybe some issues down the road, but right now it is all celebration right now for the Knicks, and I think that they are going to be so much fun to watch, so I'm excited for that. But there are a bunch of other sort of underlying things that came with this trade. Woj shortly after reported that there was some idea that the Houston Rockets think that they can trade for Kevin Durant. So we're going to dive into that whole idea of, from the Suns' perspective, whether or not they should look to move Kevin Durant this summer. And additionally, are the Rockets in a position where all of a sudden they think they can be pushing their chips in to try and go out and win a title? So we're going to be diving into all of that. But first, we have to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.